This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth, coming at you here on the heels of a highly contentious election where, in an unprecedented move, they just halted the counting of the votes last night. Well, it's not entirely unprecedented because we saw this once before in the year 2000 in the race between George Bush and Al Gore, where it became highly contested against in Florida, and they had to have the recounts. Well, fast forward 20 years, we're in the same boat again, only this time we're in the middle of a COVID 1984 nightmare. So this begs the question, what is 2021 going to look like in terms of the government's response to COVID 1984? Should Joe Biden win? And what's it going to look like should Donald Trump win? Well, joining me on the line to help us understand this is Denis Rancourt. Denis, thanks so much for joining us here today on Press for Truth. I want to get your thoughts on all this. The last time we spoke, though, I had you on and we did this video, confirmed the absolute science behind masks and the proof that they don't work with Denis Rancourt. And it was no more than a week later, Denis, than my channel on YouTube was terminated. Over 272,000 subscribers deleted. I don't think that's a coincidence. And by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, why? Please head on over to bitchute.com/pressfortruth. So on that note, Denis, I want to get your views, obviously, on where you see this going in the future for the United States and Canada in 2021, should Biden or Trump win. But before we get into any of that, maybe we could talk a little bit about what happened last night in this election in general. I mean, this is highly unprecedented, as I said, halting the view count. What's your thoughts on this? I certainly have my views on what's going on right now. We seem to be in a state of limbo, waiting to see who the winner is going to be. What's your initial reaction to the election last night and how it's going today?
Well, this is insanity that is related to two main entities within the US system that are really fighting it out. They're at each other's throats. This is not controlled opposition. This is a real fight between the people who represent globalism and the elite who are more connected with the financiers and who draw their advantage from finance and the way that they manipulate things that way on the one hand, and on the other hand you have the more national-based industry, the military, the people who are used to running an empire from a military perspective, and who and the two sides are just going crazy at each other like never before. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that the US empire, the whole system, is being very much pressured these days geopolitically. There's some really big movements in the world. Russia and China have come to understand that they cannot be crushed by the US dollar, controlled by the global currency that is printed by the US, and controlled by all the rules and regulations and blockades and everything that they do. So they are gearing and working hard to go their own way. And Eurasia is developing at an incredible pace, irrespective of what the U.S. does. So the picture is clear. Eurasia is coming to be. China is the economic leader of that. Russia is not giving its place and is shouldering it in terms of a huge military power and technologically very advanced and so on. So they are not just going to give in to total domination by the US system. And not only that, but the trajectory is that they're growing and taking more and more place. So the US system is seeing this and knows that it will no longer be able to derive its power from imposing the global currency, and it won't be able it tried to capture China by investing largely in China and tried to capture its capitalist class and so on. It failed. That failed because the Chinese kept their sovereignty. The communist government stayed in charge. Same with Russia. They weren't able to corrupt Russia. Russia under Putin remained strong and developed a strong federalist system. So they have failed to completely take over their main prospective historic opponents, and those opponents are growing. And so that's tremendous pressure because they see, especially the globalists, the only real power they have is as financiers and extracting resources through finance trickery, if you like. and influencing by social engineering what the Western societies are doing. And
Mhm.
the military people in the U.S., and they're tied to more the national industry, the military industry, and so on. They have come to understand that if they're going to survive longer and really compete with this rising Eurasia, they need a strong middle class. They need a strong nationalist state that has projections in its territories that it exploits, which is Latin America and Africa and so on. So they've come to understand that, and the two bodies are vying for internal power in restructuring this empire. That's
Right.
how I understand it. So it's a real fight, and the thing is, the globalists have gone too far. Their social engineering campaigns after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were able to change the United Nations and allow NGOs, which are funded by finance and rich interests. They gave the NGOs status of a person with rights at the UN, and so that started influencing institutions and so on in a huge way. And they just went too far with this craziness. And now they are willing to push that to the limit. So it's really a
Well,
fight. It's really a fight between the middle class, the working class, the whole Brexit movement, the yellow vests, nationalism, and Trump are all part of the same tendency, which is parties in society that want to protect themselves from a complete globalist invasion, because globalism is the opposite of democracy. It is feudalism, is what it is. It's an elite, and it's global feudalism is what globalism is. Whereas democracy has to be based regionally and nationally. A true democracy has to rely on and is nurtured by a strong middle class that ensures that the laws are not always and completely made to the advantage of an elite, but that you have some balance and you have some power in the middle class. So those are the opposing forces, and it has swung too far towards globalism. And now there's a real fight to bring it back. And at the same time, there are two very different visions within the empire of how to keep this going as long as possible, and how
well,
to,
I happen to
yeah,
think that the global elite, or the powers that ought not to be, as I like to call them, are potentially going to be using this COVID 1984 scenario as a means to be able to gain more control moving forward. And whether that be, with a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency remains to be seen. But both men have different views on how to handle this situation. Biden looks like he's quick to go into lockdowns and mandatory masks and things like that. Trump seems to be a little more open to leaving things open and allowing the economy to recover. Yet he has Operation, what is it? Where he's got the vaccines being implemented by the
Yeah,
FDA.
I think that was just a clever response to the Democrat globalists. Like before the election, you say, listen, the vaccine's going to be developed, and I've got these wonderful military people that are going to distribute it very efficiently. So end of story, right? I think that was that kind of move. There's no way they're going to be sending the army around to vaccinate people, I don't think. But that's just my sense of it. But you're right though. The whole COVID-19 thing is a Western invention, okay? And it's mainly been pushed by the globalist faction of the West, okay, for sure, clearly. It's clear that it's a Western invention because Russia has just announced they're not locking down anymore. That was in TASS just a few days ago. China stopped testing right away. China, the chairman went to Wuhan and said, "Stop this crap. This is crazy." The initial whistleblower, one of the main doctors, has actually died, and they stopped testing, and it's over. It's over in China. There's none of this madness in China. There's none of the madness anymore in Russia. Russia and China felt they had to go along because there is some intimidation involved. Vaccines are real in that you have vaccine borders, they can use vaccination as a way to close borders, completely close borders regarding trade and transportation and exchange of people and so on. So Russia and China wanted to develop their vaccines in order to counter this vaccine border thing, but it's clear that only our vaccines will do. That's their position in the West, right? So there is some real intimidation. There's some real geopolitics going on with vaccines there. And but it's a Western-driven thing, and it's driven mainly by the globalists. And therefore, if Trump wins, which I believe is going to be the case, then this will the virus will dramatically mutate. There won't be the same madness. It can't continue this way. Okay, whereas if the Democrats win, well, they'll do whatever they want to do. I'm sure they'll go on to other things. They have other projects as well, and they'll keep this thing alive just so they can use it again. That would be my idea. This is not purely about big pharma making profits. It's largely driven by that, and big pharma is connected to big finance, which is the globalist side of things. But it goes beyond that. It goes at the heart of this fight between the two factions in the empire, I think, for power, for influence in how to design society, what the institutions and universities are going to be doing, what the governments are going to be doing, how things are run. This whole crazy thing that forget real developing of the economy, developing of the middle class, developing of the working and integration of professional working class and so on. Forget that. We're just going to be concerned about racism of ideas, of the mind. And we're just going to be concerned about gender equity in the sense that you need as many CEOs of one sex as the other and so on. And we're just going to be concerned about global warming, so that we can develop a carbon economy so the financiers can control that, and the new e-currency can be based on carbon and so on. So they're willing to completely trash societies and completely re-engineer everything and just forget about the middle class and allow it to become a feudal system where you have just obedient, indoctrinated professionals, a technocratic class for the technology that you need, and then everybody else can just go to hell. And that's the globalist vision of things, whereas some other people, and I think the military, have understood that the reason an empire can succeed is you need that strong middle class. It needs to be nation-based, and it has to have a really strong middle class, which is the case in Russia right now. And I believe it's becoming the case in China. And so the countries who have a national identity, who have sovereignty, and who control their economy in a rational way are going to keep growing and succeeding. And if this internal fighting by the U.S. is just destroying so many things, and in particular people's lives, I think.
Well, I happen to think they're utilizing their modus operandi of order out of chaos. A lot of this is purposefully generated so that they can offer the solution to all these problems that we're currently dealing with. And I think this is also a part of their modus operandi is to muddy the waters in terms of the science in regards to COVID-19. We've heard so many things going back and forth, whether it's coming from the CDC or Fauci, and so many people don't even know what to believe anymore. Epidemiologists are probably arguing about what's happening.
The science is irrelevant, and that's how they want it to be. It's not about science anymore. If you take out the middle class, if you take out the educational system, if you stop requiring that people can actually think, and it's all about indoctrination, and it's all about believing who's good and who's bad. Science, real science that people can understand and read and live with, no longer exists. So it's not about the science anymore. It's all about the messaging. But if we look at the science now for a while, because that's what I've been doing, I am shocked that the epidemiologists are just sleeping on this one. They are not doing their job. They're completely out of touch. There are some huge things happening epidemiologically that have never happened in the history of these types of diseases before. And let me tell you what they are. If you look at all-cause mortality as a function of time, there was a huge peak that suddenly spiked up right after the pandemic was announced that has to be due to what the response was that caused that mortality, because it is completely absent in some jurisdictions and very strong in others. And that is unheard of. If you look at the all-cause mortality, the winter burden deaths, which are cyclical and seasonal, they're always very regular, and they're the same in every jurisdiction in mid-latitude countries, Europe and the US and Canada and so on. They're always the same. But this is a case where these new peaks are very granular. They can occur in one small jurisdiction, and right beside it there's nothing, which is it's unheard of, and it's because of how it's the response that's killing people. I've written several papers about this, as you know, but it's the response. It's locking in elderly people, fragile people that have been infected into seclusion, into total isolation, people who have mental disorders, who cannot see anyone, who don't see their regular caregivers. They just killed them, okay? And they infected people by transferring these people into the care homes. People from hospitals that were in care units in hospitals were transferred into care homes. So you have infections. Epidemics in care homes, that science is well known. And you don't do this. You cannot do this. And they did it. So there have been some mass crimes, and the signatures are all there in the data, but the epidemiologists are being silent. It's crazy. They're treating it as though this were all about a viral strain, instead of looking at how different the phenomenon is in this man-caused deaths versus just a virus acting in a society that has not been perturbed by these massive new regulations and impeding of movement and so on. Okay. In the US, not only do you have that peak that comes right after March 11th, after they announced the pandemic at the World Health Organization, but now in the US, something else has happened. You've got a huge all-cause mortality peak, never seen before, occurring in the summer, for God's sakes. That never happens. The only peaks, if you look at the seasonal variation of all-cause mortality since the Second World War, in all the industrialized countries that we have good data for, nothing like this has ever happened before. Nothing like it. And the thing is, if you go state to state, there are states where nothing happens and other states where it's a very massive phenomenon. So it's not about a virus, because when it's about a virus, it's the same everywhere. You can look at these fingerprint seasonal variations. They're the same everywhere when it's the normal viral phenomenon in an unperturbed society. So here you've got induced deaths induced by the government lockdowns and by the government responses and by what was actually done in detail and to whom was it done. That's what is causing and has caused those deaths. And nobody's saying it. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's examining who is dying and what are they dying from, really. What are the circumstances? There are no investigations. There are no hotspot identifications where you send in investigating teams. There's nothing like that happening. It's absolutely insane. So you've got this massive killing going on in the summer. Like I said, the only time that a peak in all-cause mortality has ever occurred in the summer is a heat wave. You can see very, very sharp, narrow heat wave peaks that happen, for example, it happened in France, big cities and so on. The elderly people, you don't have air conditioning and you kill a lot of people. So this has been documented, these heat waves. Or, there has to be a phenomenon like an earthquake to cause a massive peak in all-cause mortality all of a sudden. So this is unprecedented. Many people are dying in the United States. We should be investigating what are the hotspots, where are the states where this is happening, and who is it that's dying, and what are their circumstances, their human circumstances. Why are they dying? Because we know that if the thing that makes you most susceptible to being infected by a viral respiratory disease and really having complications are how fragile you are, comorbidity, but also the features in more healthy people that are dominant, and this has been proven and scientifically established, is psychological stress that you're being subjected to in your life, and social isolation. Those are two major factors that will determine how sick you will get if you are infected by a viral respiratory disease. So They are inducing conditions. They are creating conditions locally by the way that they're sending in police and these lockdown forces and restructuring society, keeping people indoors in the US where they're air conditioned. The air is dry. Dry air is the kind of air that supports aerosols in suspension in the air. So you've got entire buildings where you've got high density of these aerosol, viral containing aerosol particles that are suspended in the air. That's never been done before. This kind of closing the doors and keeping people indoor and air conditioning, never been done before. So there are all these factors that are new that need to be investigated to understand this massive killing that's going on. And it's not being done. Nobody's saying anything intelligent about it. The epidemiologists are like they've got these blinders on and they're not looking at the granularity of the process. They're not looking at how different it is from place to place. They're not, they're thinking in terms of infection fatality ratios and the strain of the virus and things like that. They're completely idiotic in their outlook about this phenomenon. And
Correct.
so that's the thing that concerns me.
Well, having said that, let's focus now on how we can move towards some solutions. I mean, do you think awareness is still key at this point? Are we still at the point here where we have to get the information out to the public that there's a serious disinformation problem in the first place, or are we beyond that and it's now to the point of getting like more active?
I'm hoping that people who get upset and completely lose faith in the messaging, the government, the science, and who instead turn to themselves and their own knowledge and people they trust to get knowledge from, I'm hoping that that could be contagious. I'm hoping that people could be upset enough that they say, wow, they're killing people here, and I don't want that to happen in my community. There's no way they're coming in here. There's no way they're doing that. What we need is more and more people getting that upset that they just turn off from this crazy nonsense that they're hearing on TV all the time, and that they're encouraging each other to not believe this garbage and to look at things more carefully and to educate themselves by discussion and by challenging each other. You can't just listen to what's on the computer or do a Google search to become educated. You have to be challenged. You have to meet people who are going to confront you, and you have to confront them enough with an open mind to figure things out. We've got to learn how to learn again, and that has to become contagious. The resilience, independence of thought, not trusting these crazies who are engineering our society, all of those features, these reactions of the human being, that has to become contagious so that so that we're not susceptible to them doing this to society again or as much, and we resist it more. So we have to develop immunity against their nonsense and their rules and their protocols, which are insane and are not science-based. We've got to develop immunity. And so the problem is the professional classes are completely bought out. They're not losing their salaries. They're salaried. They've been fed ideology from university on. They're not about to budge. So the only place where this contagion that I'm talking about can happen is in the working and middle classes, and the people who are not completely bought out and who are really suffering from this, like small business owners and so on. That's where we need to spread this contagion of resistance.
Very well said. I think, yeah, we need to catch a case of the truth, and like you
Yeah.
said, build that immunity against all this corruption and lies moving forward. And you've been doing a great job at that. You've been producing scientific papers. So, remarkably, you're still on Twitter. They haven't actually, chopped you down yet. I'm sure you're on the chopping block because you're speaking so much truth. But
Yes.
until that happens, where can people find you so they can follow you to learn more from you?
Well, my most of my research articles, except one important one that was deplatformed, are on ResearchGate.
Okay.
That's still a main place where I put my actual research articles. And it was borderline me suing them the last time they deplatformed me, so I don't know how that struggle is going to go. But they've left them there now, And my articles are getting, over 100,000 and over 50,000 reads on ResearchGate by scientists and engineers and so on. So that's good. I'm still on Twitter, as you said. I'm on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and they deplatformed one video. What I'm finding is that they deplatform material that is too popular.
Mhm.
As soon as it catches on, this video was seen by over 1 million people, an interview I did in French, and they took it down from the original site that had done the interview. I put it on my site, and it got taken down within hours, within minutes, in fact. Okay, so every video that I've done, a few videos that have had over 1 million views in interview, both in English and in French, and they've all been systematically taken down. The one article that was deplatformed from ResearchGate had 400,000 reads, and it was just going viral. It was just going wild. Everyone was reading it. It was the one that entitled Masks Don't Work, where I did a review of the science and policy of masks and so on. And so I asked them what's going on with, and they actually admitted we took it down because it was getting too many reads. It was being read too much, and therefore that could have a negative impact on health, public health and so on. So we took it down. Yeah, yeah. So,
That's exactly what happened to the Press for Truth channel. We were growing exponentially in 2020. We were gaining more and more reach. It was really starting to take off, and then
yes,
boom, like we can't
they're
let this guy get too popular.
they're incredibly hypocritical. They will not, they won't behave like China or other jurisdictions that just say these topics are not allowed. What they do is they pretend that everything's allowed, but then they come in and surgically remove anything that catches on, anything that starts to have influence, they surgically remove it. It's very dishonest. There needs to be that needs to happen in the future. There needs to be consequences to the people who are suppressing speech and who have the privilege of using the publicly funded internet and the privilege of having these corporations where individuals are protected from liability. They have all these legal structures that are to their advantage, and they're using public funds to control the space, the mental environment. Yet they're being given the right to censor and to mold and to shape society. That has
Mhm.
got to change. We have got to, when the middle class gets stronger, when we recover democracy, we will be changing those rules. We will be kicking those people out and making sure that, see, right now the rules that we're working under have been completely designed by influential people in an absence of democracy, in an absence of a working class that is tied to a professional class that wants the good of society, as opposed to this global feudalism. So that's the struggle. That's what it's about. And when societies find their democracy, they do pass good laws. They pass laws that protect them from irresponsible corporations, which are not persons. They're not individuals, and they should not have the freedom of an individual. They need to respect some basic principles because they have too much power.
Hmm. Awesome, interesting stuff. I have a little bit of a different take on democracy. I put out a two-part series, the Democracy Deception Part One and the Democracy Deception Part Two. What's the alternative? I would encourage people to check that out if you want to get my views on that. But yeah, on that note, I just want to thank you once again for coming on. Any final thoughts about this limbo state of Trump versus Biden and who, where we're at right now in the election?
Well, I really, my gut tells me, looking at the numbers and so on, that Trump has won. If they, and there's some evidence that they've tampered with the votes. There's some pretty strong evidence that they've tampered with the votes. As a statistician, I can say that. So I just hope that they let him have it, because if it goes to the Supreme Court and there's that kind of a battle, it's just going to be a mess.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
It's going to be a mess. So
yeah.
we'll see.
We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see. Again, as part of their modus operandi about order out of chaos, this may be all part of the plan, but it all remains to be seen. So, we'll continue to track this, obviously, and I want to encourage people to check you out on Twitter, and also where they can find your scientific papers. Links will be located in the description below. Once again, Denis Rancourt, thanks so much for talking to
It
us.
was my pleasure, Dan. Thanks a lot.